All right. We're live with the three chairmen. Board meeting is in session.
Hello.
And, we got, of course, Brian Omilion, Grant Klassen.
Hello.
And
Hello.
And me. And you can just see my name in the corner, I guess. I don't want to talk about myself. But Brian, you're gonna lead us today.
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Let's go. All right. So today we're talking about switchers. I mean, it's the most common thing I think we all kind of experience on a lot of boards is switchers, and the most common question I get is, which switcher do I buy, really? So it's gonna be cool. I made some charts for anyone that's on YouTube to see it, so you can see these beautiful last minute charts I made at midnight last night of just some different switching. Hey, I mean, my kids, they keep us up all night, so I was up making them, and I just want people to see that there's different options and pricing and features, and it all kind of depends on their system. So I'm excited to get your guys' input, and I know you guys, we all have our own kind of like we all specialize in different types of switchers. Like I do more of the RJM. Like I'm excited to hear what you guys are thinking. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll just kind of just chat. Actually, before that, I want to see what are your guys' top 2 favorite switchers. I'm curious.
Mason, come on, man.
Oh yeah, Mason, let's go.
I'd say RJM and Musicom Lab are the 2 best switchers in my opinion.
Okay. Grant?
If it was for my personal rig, then I would absolutely go with something like an RJM. But I also just like, if I was going to go a totally different direction, this may come up later, it may not, something like a Loopmaster. Just the simplest, bare bones, true bypass switcher you can get. But it depends on context, which I know you'll take us to later, Brian. So I go RJM on one end of the spectrum, Loopmaster on another.
Okay, I agree with you.
Because you like the cowboy on the Loopmaster, he's got his lasso.
I'm a Western fan, man. I mean, everything about me screams Western. Like, I'm John Wayne. So, yeah, you absolutely nailed it.
No, I agree completely. I think when it comes down to it, it's like people look at switchers and they kind of get intimidated, honestly, because you'll see some switchers like this one I have behind me. It's a PVC 10, multiple layers with one of your Vertex boards. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on, and it scares people. It really does. But then you get switchers. I have one around here. It's like the DPC Micro from Disaster Area, like little. It's compact, 3 loops. It's very simple, and it kind of, it does real basic stuff, but it still gets people the gain stacking because, like, they may want different stages of gain to pile on or whatever. But I think it would be interesting to hear your guys' approach to like how you determine like which switcher you're gonna like put on the board, because I get it all the time. They're like, I've been looking at switchers. I'm down between a Boss ES8, an RJM PBC 10, and a Gig Rig G3. And I always weigh the pros and cons, and obviously budget, that's a huge factor in it. But my go-to is always RJM, obviously, because I'm so fluent in it. It's just basic. But I'm kind of curious how Mason and Grant, you guys kind of get like you kind of determine, do you go off of specs, or you go? Obviously, we're all basing off of capability of loops and how many loops you need. But I'm just kind of curious, like if someone's like, oh yeah, I want these options. How you kind of determine like what your suggestions, even if it's not your top 2, like you may be like, oh, it's not my top 2, but this is a third choice I have, those kind of things.
I think it's really important to just like, honestly, with any piece of gear, it's really important to just like take a step back, maybe a deep breath, maybe a sip of whiskey, and just ask yourself like,
Yes.
Why do I want this? Like, why do I want the G3? Why do I want a switcher in general? And is it because of the hype and you keep getting ads thrown at you because your best friend just got one, or because your, Guitar Hero the rig doctor plays one on one of his videos. Like, why do you want a switcher? And if it's not for a real practical reason and you're maybe just getting caught up, then I think it's really good to just ask yourself what benefits this will bring. Because there's a lot of guys, I mean, the thing I do the most, more than any setups, is I talk to people about their rigs. Like, I'll do rig consults. And a lot of times, I used to get surprised by this, not so much anymore. A lot of times people are like, I think I need a switcher. I want to put a switcher on. I'm like, all right, tell me why you want this switcher. And at the end of the day, we get to the end of the call, it's like, you don't need a switcher for what you're doing.
Yeah.
You have 6 pedals on your board, 3 of them are always on, and you're happy to turn them on and off at the pedal. And so, like, you don't need the expense, you don't need the extra complication. It's sounding great already. And so I think really that's the first thing you really need to ask yourself is what will this allow you to do practically while you're playing, while you're setting up for a gig, and then look at specs after that. That's how I would love to approach it. I hate selling people on stuff just because they think they need it. It's better, in my opinion, it's better to try and dig down a little deeper and figure out what this will practically do. After that, specs, I mean, loops, some guys love loop reordering. And then even with loop reordering, like on the 6X or an ES8 or something like that, it can be really handy. But then again, practically you start asking questions like, it's a great feature, but for this person, they're never going to use it. For other people, we'll move an Iridium or an ACS1, like an amp and cab sim, depending on the gig. They need it in different spots on their board. It's like, oh, the 6X, you hit a button, and now it's set up for wet, dry, wet globally. You hit another button, and now it's for wet only. And like loop reordering is a game changer. It's huge. For other people, it's useless. So I think that's my take before I start rambling too long.
No, I love it. I'm curious about you, Mason. What do you think?
I would say that, in the course of determining whether you need a switcher or not, I would say most people who are wanting to use switchers probably don't need them. And I think a lot of the things that the misconceptions or the preconceived notions are that a switcher is going to result in better overall tone because of the isolated loops. And I think to a degree that's true. But you could also achieve that same thing in what Grant had suggested as one of his possible favorites by using some sort of true bypass looper that doesn't have any MIDI programmability and is just mechanical switches in series. You can still isolate every pedal from one another.
Yeah. And
I've seen in many cases, even recently, where people will, they have a big budget, they're at Fogo de Chao, the Brazilian steakhouse. It's got, 20 different types of meat and, 150 different items at the salad bar. And, they're loading up on everything, and
this is a metaphor.
This is a metaphor.
Oh, man, I was drooling over here.
I thought we were talking about lunch after. Ooh.
Yeah. And so, I think that what invariably happens is people overcomplicate their rigs. It's not a vetted process, and they get it out on whatever their context is, and they find themselves really confused. They're not really as willing to go through the MIDI programming as they thought. They're unwilling to familiarize themselves with the software as, comparatively to what they originally thought. And they end up not actually being able to utilize the features that a switcher brings to, benefit a guitar player. And so I really don't suggest that anybody get a switcher unless they've at least already dove into MIDI, or they've had some sort of switcher before, or they've used some sort of true bypass looper and they need those extra functions because they've already qualified themselves for that particular application. Somebody who's building their first pedal board and is diving into the deep end of the pool with a switcher, invariably most of those people are going to be disappointed. And really, I think the benefit of the switcher is primarily for people that are playing live, that they are playing, to a set list, that's really where I think the switcher becomes valuable, because you need to be able to call up a lot of dissimilar tones song to song. You can create programmable presets based on the song with specific BPMs. And the software and back end of a lot of these, like an RJM, is specifically designed for that sort of application. And so if you're using it for just playing at home, it's not really that valuable. And I think we can see that even in a professional context, guys that are session musicians, say, a Tim Pierce or a Tom Bukovac, or, fill in the blank session musician that's playing on tons of hit records. Most of those guys don't use switchers because there's not enough consistency amongst the type of sounds that they need to create in order to necessitate a switcher, because, they're doing a record for Maren Morris, and that's one particular sound. They go and turn around the next week and they're doing, a Keith Urban record with Dan Huff, and it's a completely different sound that they need, and so if in those rigs sound great, and nobody would ever accuse those guys of having bad tone, and almost none of them use switchers. So I think that there is probably an over usage of switchers, and I think that a lot of people are putting them on their boards and are ending up frustrated because they don't know how to utilize the full capability. And a lot of people that I know that use them are basically just using them as true bypass loopers. They might as well be using a loop master.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one thing, sorry, Brian, you go.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say one thing. On the other end of the spectrum, I was having a chat with someone last week, and they were the front man, front woman. They were the front person of their band. They were singing and playing guitar and doing a couple of lead things. And their biggest frustration was they didn't have a switcher on this board while we were chatting, is that they had to go into a chorus and sing on, the downbeat. At the same time, they had to make 3 changes on their pedal board. And so we were talking about options, and they basically said, I really just want to hit one button on my board, and I want a whole bunch of changes to happen. Yeah. And I was like, all right, this is potentially a great candidate for a switcher, because you can hit one button, you can do MIDI changes, which basically means, you can tell your pedals to change tempo, you can tell your timeline to change to the next preset while also turning on and off overdrives that are in your switcher. And so he can now do that one button, he's ready for the downbeat, and he can sing and play, and then get ready for the instrumental coming up, hit another button, and his sounds completely change again for a lead line. And I think after chatting to him, he was the perfect candidate for that, that category of a pedal board. And so I think, it's just really good to think, like, what are your frustrations? What do you need to happen? And is the switcher the fix, or is it just something you kind of have convinced yourself you need? Which I have to say I have done over and over again and regretted it.
Same. No, I agree. I'm not a full-time player. I mean, I play weekly. I used to play 3-4 times a week when I was at a different church. But for like me, and I tell people the same thing. It's like what you guys have just said, and everything is absolutely correct. It's like, what are your needs? And like, I told one guy, he was hard set on doing a switcher. And then by the end of it, he didn't do a switcher because he's like, oh, I guess I really only do like kick that fuzz off and kick it on. Like, it was like really simple. And I was like, I was like, if you need to stack gain stages, like, here's some minimal options. There's like a PBC 10. Like, you don't need all those options if you don't need. He had 0 MIDI. Like, I was like, man, there's plenty of switchers out there. Even like the QSAC, like the Tamer, like those, like those systems. There's a great systems. They don't have MIDI. There's a reason. I mean, like the Hillsong guys, obviously, Grant, you know of that. Like those guys use Michael Guy Chisholm. They use the big ones, the Tamer, the 10s or whatever, and like those are doing the different types of stacking that they need. But it's not getting into all that crazy MIDI, all those changes. Because I have a PVC 10. And I have a Nova delay and with a MIDI mod, and it's sending it PCs, but like. Besides that, it's switching off a couple of my boosts and my overdrives and stuff because I'm not very complicated. But for someone like me that's playing, I'm also doing MD. I'm playing lead and rhythm at the same. Typically, I'm doing both. Right, I'm switching between the two. But,
do you have a double neck guitar?
Oh, right. No,
Yep.
no, it's fun. Playing that lead line and you have
Yep.
to switch to the chord. It's the best thing ever.
Lead and rhythm.
It's so much fun, and I love it so much. But it's like me playing, and then the vocalist being like, "Can you tell us when they'll come in on that part?" And I'm like, "Do you understand all this stuff that I have going on?" So, and it's funny. It's happened before. I was told by a vocalist, "Can you tell me when to come into my part?" I'm like, "Don't you have a screen right there that tells you your lyrics?" I don't have that kind of thing. So for me, having that. And it's actually a Disaster Area Designs quote, "One tap changes everything" for me. I have 4 songs on my PVC 10. Clean, clean delay, dirty, dirty delay, and solo and a swell. That's it for all 4 songs. But for me, it's that one tap. I'm not having to worry about doing all these changes because I go through boards constantly. I probably went through 20 different types of boards during COVID. I didn't play a single time. Like, I was constantly changing it, but I was switcher, no switcher. Yes, switcher. Like it's always changing and whatnot, but like it came down to like me going, oh man, I need the flexibility and the easiness of it. So that's like a big part I tell people is like they're cool, they look cool, and like they're heavy though. That's like there's the ways and pros and cons. But it all comes down to it's the same thing is if you need it or not, and there's some people that just don't. So I think that is great. I am really curious, Mason, because I've seen you recently post about it. The PBC, I think it's the PBC 6 or the 10. You did a special like run of them where it was like your a different impedance. I'm actually really curious about that.
Okay.
If you're fine with talking about it,
sure.
I'm curious about it because I think I remember what's stock and then what you put in it, but I'm curious of your take because I've had people ask me about that, and I don't know all the very nitty gritty details of those kind of things, but I'm actually really curious about how much that affects like your input tone for a switcher.
Yeah. So what Brian's talking about is we collaborated on a small run of switchers with RJM, where the input impedance of the input buffer was changed to a higher value than what would be stock. And this is, again, just speaking about the input buffer only, not the output buffers on the switchers. So just the one that's right up in the front. And normally an RJM has a 500 ohm input, 500K input impedance. And that's, fine, but most amplifiers that most of us will play into, or most of the classic amplifiers that most of us know and recognize, Marshalls, Fenders, Vox, etc., are almost all invariably a 1 meg input impedance. And so when you match the input buffer to the input impedance of the amplifier, your guitar is seen as close to what it would see if you were to plug directly into the amp. And so by consequence of that, your guitar pickups are going to react as closely as they would as though there were no pedal board in play. Whereas with the RJM at 500K, which is half of 1 meg, that puts a load on the guitar pickups. And Ron, in his tests, found that he thought that sounded better to him. And it may sound better to you. It may sound better if it's unloaded. Maybe it's higher than 1 meg. Maybe it's 2 meg, like you like it really unloaded. And that might be possible too. But my goal always when making a rig is to get it as close to the sound of the guitar and amp alone, even if you're running through 10, 15, or 20 pedals. And so this is the reason why I said to Ron, it would be really cool if we could do a run of switchers that had this input impedance, because some of them I was changing the resistor values to make it 1 meg, because it's just a choice. It's not like a redesign of the entire system or the entire buffer. It's just what you choose. Like even on the DIY buffers that we have, diagrams and schematics for that people can download and make themselves, you can set the input impedance by whatever the R1 value is, the first resistor in the signal path of the PCB that comes with these DIY buffers. You can set it. You put a 1 meg resistor in there, you got 1 meg. You put a 2 meg in there, you got 2 meg. You go to 500K, you got 500K.
Yeah.
You can set it to whatever you want. Or you could wire it off to a switch and have a variable input impedance even if you wanted. Okay. So in any case, that was what we did with RJM, and I think we made maybe 15 of them or so, and they sold them out in a couple hours. People were really, really into it, but I think it was, and I didn't do the mod; they were doing it from the factory. Okay. And I think it was a pain in the butt though, and they never wanted to do it again. Because I also think from their customer standpoint, it's distracting if there's like more than one option, and from a manufacturing standpoint, I think it's kind of a hassle to have to like separate a certain number of them from every run and then do this change, and it's sort of just like an extra step that's not really part of their process. So I could understand their reasoning for not doing it, but that would be the one thing that I would say about the RJM. For all the things that it's really great at, I think that it would actually be more neutral if the input impedance was at 1 meg, because again, there's no amps out there that have a 500K input impedance, except for maybe some of the older Gibson amps had a 500K input impedance, but for the most part, it's all 1 meg. And with passive guitar pickups, we want them to react, like they are plugged right into an amp. And so I think 1 meg on an input buffer is pretty mission critical if you want to get that same reaction that you're used to.
Gotcha. I'm trying to recall back from one of your videos. Did you say the Musicom series has like an input that is closer to that?
Yeah, the Musicom Lab, some of the early ones were actually unloaded. They were like 2.2 meg. Okay. So about double, so like RJM is half of what most amplifiers are. For a while, the Musicom was double, and then the latest versions are all 1 meg and 100 ohm output impedance. So that's kind of the goal. If you're looking for a high quality buffer, whether it's in a switcher, whether it's a standalone, you want 1 meg on the input and 100 ohms on the output, or as close to zero. I think some people get confused because they go, well, my buffer's 1K, so that's better, right? Because it's more than 100. And it's like, the further it gets away from zero, the worse it is. The worse it is at driving capacitance on the output. So like a Boss buffer, usually those are 1K on the output. Those are not so good at driving long lines. Closer to zero, the better it is at driving longer lines and more capacitance on the output.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. I remember seeing it coming out, and I was like, "Oh, that's really cool." But I only saw a limited run, so I wasn't.
Yeah, I don't know that it will be made again. I think it was a headache. I mean, I'm grateful for them for doing it. It was really cool, and I know people really dug it. But I could also understand why they wouldn't want to continue doing it, because having to pivot away from your normal processes is a pain in the butt.
Yeah. No, I understand. Well, I'm gonna pull up this little graphic I made.
Yeah, so let's talk about people who actually needs. If you're qualified for a switcher, what are we looking at?
Yeah. So if you're qualified and you're looking for a switcher, here are just some options. And you guys, I basically just pull very little, like minimal information of each, because the amount of information in every one of these units would take up multiple screens. So if you're listening, you got to go watch this on YouTube, because Brian has created a beautiful diagram here of all of the switchers, their price points. They are beautiful. Shout out to Brian.
Definitely.
Thank you. I was trying to get that Vertex level graphics. So every time I see them, I'm like, dang it, those look so good. So I will say, if you're listening, I'll go over all the specs and some of the specs that we have here, and then go online. I really encourage you can go online on YouTube and watch it and see all of our beautiful faces. But so you got the DPC Micro. The great thing about the Micro is that it has 3 channels. There's actually 2 configurations. There's a switched and switchless version. So you can't see, obviously you can't see with your ears, because if you're listening, you won't see it. But in the YouTube, I have a board back here that I did a switchless on. So it's underneath, paired with a MIDI controller. So it's hiding under a riser, or it's going underneath a board, and it's allowing additional loops for the guy to access, which is really cool. And it doesn't get in the way. It has MIDI in and out. But they also have the switched version, where it's 3 loops, presets, a manual mode, and it'll send PCs out. I don't think you can. It's different from the DMC versions, because the DMCs, they actually have a screen where you can set different devices like A, B, C, D. This doesn't have that option, to my knowledge. I know it can send at least one PC out. So if you're looking for something minimum, you have 3 gain stage pedals that you want, light, medium, and heavy. This might be a really good option. And if you're maybe sending it to switch to a different reverb or something, that's what I would suggest.
And another thing that's cool with this as well, sorry, Mason, another thing that's cool with this is you don't have to lock in one pedal per loop. You could do
Correct.
Loop 1 is your overdrives, and there might be 3 overdrives. Loop 2 is all your modulation. Loop 3, I mean, you can get creative is all I'm saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of how the Eric Johnson rig is, where he kind of has created primitive presets by having a series of A-B loops. And there's certain pedals that are common amongst certain loops, and then certain pedals that are dissimilar. And so his dirty rhythm is he's hitting 2 foot switches, and it's bringing in certain combinations of pedals. And then his lead tone is he hits one of them off, and then it's the lead tone, and it's a series of 3 true bypass loops that have just a send and return on them, and then it can go to different amps and things like that. And I feel you could actually achieve most of that by just using something like this. Of course, he's old school analog and doesn't even want LEDs on his true bypass loopers. And has to use George L cable and all that stuff. But that's the super OG preset system, the Eric Johnson way. And then if you want to upgrade, then you can go get a Disaster Area. I can't believe it's $189.
That's awesome.
Just speaking from a manufacturing standpoint, and Grant can speak to this too. It's hard to even make something for $200.
Yep.
That's painted and has some amount of circuitry in it. So for $189, man,
he does it all in house, which is great. So he drills, insane. He prints. Yeah,
Mr. Area, man, he's doing a good job.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Matthew. So I got to meet him at NAMM. I think it was NAMM a couple of years ago.
Oh, so his last name isn't Area?
Matthew Area.
No, I can't remember his last name. I know it's Matthew. It's something. But he's very smart. The amount of work that he puts into these switchers, and the cool thing is, it's this DPC micro. It's just a miniature version of his DPC 6 or DPC 5 and DPC 8. But yeah, the amount of stuff that he packs into these switchers, and there's even micro, they call it the mini baby. It's a single switch, but that one switch can do sends out multiple PCs. It's just a MIDI switch. But his stuff is insane. I want to say this might have an editor. I'm not really sure. I've never had to do the switched versions. I've had all the switchless versions, but it accepts PCs, CCs, and if you don't know what PCs, it's preset controls and control changes. So those control changes can turn on A or B or C. It will turn them on individually if you are running them with a switcher. But PCs is where your program changes you're sending to your timeline to change to a different delay or to a reverb. So if you're listening, PC and CC, you'll hear that often. I am curious because I don't work with all these switchers. I do work with most of these switchers. I'm curious if you guys have ever worked with the Atom yet.
No.
Yeah, I think I've done one board with the Atom. It was when it was new, so take all of this with a grain of salt, and I assume a lot of this has been fixed. But when it was brand new, the hardware had been completed, but the software was still being worked on. So some of the stuff you might take for granted that should be there on a MIDI controller wasn't quite developed yet. Okay. This was quite a while ago now, close to when they first came out. So I assume all of that has been now fixed and it's working great. But that was my only experience with it. It was a good experience.
Is there an editor for the gig rig stuff yet?
No, they have a Bluetooth. I didn't put it on here, but it has a Bluetooth app. I dove into it a little bit while working with Andy on his board. He has the bigger version, the big G3. All you can do is change, I think, your set list. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Grant, if you know. But to my knowledge, I don't think it has an RJM or a Boss editor, which I will say, I didn't know Boss had an editor. I actually didn't know that they had an editor, and my manager was like, yeah, they have an editor. And I was like, They do?
it's just not
Seriously?
that it's just not that easy to tap into, because you have to use their kind of like Roland a MIDI in and MIDI out connection that then connects to a USB.
Oh wow!
So it's
you have to have an interface.
Yeah, it's a little tricky. Although I hope I'm not letting the cat out of the bag here, but my understanding is that they're coming out with a newer version that does have a USB-C on it, so that you can connect to the editors. But yeah, I mean, I would say that I've only worked with the G2. I haven't worked with any of the G3. But I would say one thing, and this isn't a knock on Dan or the gig rig, because I think that, you know, Dan certainly brings a high level of value to the gear community and the stuff that he does. But I think that because of how pervasive their channel is, I think a lot of people view the G3 as sort of the epitome of switchers, or sort of the best of them, because of how much weight their channel and their voice carries in the community. I would say that I see these very infrequently. You know, like in my entire career, I've only seen one G2. And I would say of the pro level rig builders, whether it's us, whether it's Dave Friedman, whether it's Exactone, I would say that these are coming in maybe 1 in 100, you know, or if we're seeing them with any regularity, it's with the same person. And so I don't see them around that often. I don't think that there are as many of them out on the market as there are of the RJM or of the Musicom Lab or of the Boss.
Yeah.
And I would say that for the price point relative to what they do, if I were going to take this on a tour, it's the software of the RJM is so well vetted and is so well designed for live application, and to really be able to program your set list. Even if sonically the gig rig were superior to everything out there, and I would say I don't think that it is. I think it's on par with the best stuff. I feel like the editing component is a huge differentiator between RGM and pretty much everybody else in the marketplace. If you are doing this professionally and you need to have a system that, like, if your RGM goes down, you can plug in a USB stick with your programming and you have it exactly back where it was. Like, that to me is such a mission critical component and feature that needs to be present on a switcher. They're if you call Ron or Sherry at RJM and you have a problem, you can literally just export them whatever it is that you have on your switcher, and Ron will go and fix it and send it back to you, you know, like in a day, you know, even sometimes less. And I'm talking about not just me. I've had customers send them, you know, issues, and they resolve it for them in the same timeline as they would for me. And I had a guy that had a couple of issues, and Ron replaced the PVC for him completely, like no questions asked. And so, like, being able to have access to the product is also important. I think the G3 is pretty hard to get here. You know, like, of course they're available, but they're very difficult to get. They're typically not in stock. And so it's like, what do you do if you're a pro? Your Atom goes down. You have to reprogram the whole thing, I think, firstly, and then I think secondly, you'd have to figure out how to even get one. And so I think that these are concerns that I think are legitimate if you're a professional musician and you're depending upon this to make your living.
And the other thing I will say, I tell guys this when we're talking switchers, no one values customer service until they need it.
Right.
And so when you're stuck or something's not going the way you want, or you're trying to troubleshoot, like, good luck getting a 1-day turnaround from Boss. Like, good luck getting quick answers but with someone like RJM, who's a smaller company but value customer service, it only means the world when you need it. And if you do, you're going to be glad that you made a decision that you know, helps facilitate that. And so I do think, don't underestimate customer service, or at least don't ignore it. Factor it in.
Yeah. No, I agree. I will say I've had 2 of these units. I've had a couple of the G3s through, like I said, working with Andy. But, like, I think a big part that people don't ever really factor in, and it's pretty critical, especially with a board layout, is like the jacking on the back and I'm not knocking it. It's a great unit. It really is. I played through it. I've never really dived in. The whole just push, looking down and pushing a button and you can engage and build presets without having to go into submenus. That's really cool. And if you're a visual person that needs it right there, that's great. I'm a person that likes pages and those kind of things. So like the RJM I like. But like the jacks on the back, they're a lot tighter. They're the metal, I don't know what the correct term is, but they had the metal
open frame jack.
Yes. So, his might be like closed. I think they're closed. Like
they're probably enclosed in the back, but they have the metal. Yeah. They have the metal nuts and bushings. Not like a Nutric, or Neutrik
exactly.
plastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So like the RJMs, they have the Nutric ones where these are like those, because I've actually opened up because I bolt the G2 or 3 down on boards for ones that are touring, but like those types of switchers, like you have to use like straight plugs, or you have to only use right angle plugs, like, but then they stick up really high. So like there's different things to factor in switchers, or like the PBC 6 or 10, they're square plug friendly, those kind of things. So I think there's kind of a line of like, it's not just like, oh, yep, it does everything for me, but you have to factor in like, is it going to fit on my board? Is it going to fit the cabling I had? Because I just ordered, $300 worth of custom length Goodwood audio cables that they just soldered up. They just soldered it up, and they look beautiful, and they're ready to go. And I get them, and they're all square plugs, and they don't fit in my G3 or my Boss ES8. Like, obviously, I would be pissed. Mostly myself, because I didn't take the time to research it. And those little things, like, that's money, that's time, that's delay in you getting your stuff put together. So, I mean, yeah, all like looking through all the specs and stuff, I always tell people, like make sure your cabling is going to, if you have pre-made cabling, make sure it's going to fit. Obviously, when we do builds, like we consult what we're going to use, the spacing we're going to need to do it. Because I use a pedal site called Pedal Playground, like daily, to do pedal mock-ups, and I'll have people, they'll send me a mock-up where the switcher's right here and then the pedal's right here. There's like an inch, and I'm looking at this going, so are we using wireless cables for everything?
Bluetooth for life.
I'm like, they don't make wireless pancake plugs. Like, if they did, God bless America, but that's not gonna happen. But I'm just like, you have to leave room. You have to factor in the cable. And the guy's like, oh, I just bought this board from this company and it was $1,000. And I'm like,
ooh,
what pedals you guys cut?
There's $1,000 pedal board?
Schmidt-Array's up there.
Schmidt-Array's are.
Yeah, those things are like weapons, man. They're so heavy.
It's furniture. They're beautiful.
They are
beautiful. They are
heavy.
This is independent of me making pedal boards. You need a case for your case if you're going to take it on the road.
Yep.
And so now it's like 100 pounds.
Yeah.
I went to Anderton's once a couple of years ago, and Pete had just had a board finished, and it was beautiful, and it had the Schmidt-Array, and I couldn't believe how heavy it was, and it was small. It was smaller than, it was equivalent to like our 17 by 10 travel light boards, and it weighed 60 pounds with the top off.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was like, oh my God, like, if you can't carry it on, you're in trouble.
Yeah, well, and so like I've had the pleasure of getting to do one for Audio Posen and for Josh Smith, and they're beautiful boards. They really are, like you just said, and like those two guys crammed the pack out of the pack the crap out of it. God, I can't speak. Pack the crap out of these boards, and they can fit a lot of stuff underneath and on top and everything. And before the lid put it on, I think I weighed it, and it was like 67 pounds for just the board. And putting the lid doesn't weigh a lot, but then like Josh, we packed it inside a Pelican case around pluck and pull foam and sent it to him. And I think he's on tour with Joe Bonamassa right now with his bigger board, which also goes into a Pelican case. And I always recommend people, like, if you have that stuff, if you can't carry that on, listen, I worked for an airline for 4 years. I know what they do to really heavy packages. I was never that guy because I was a nice kid growing up. But still, like they would throw the heavy stuff. That's just what they did. So I always tell people, I'm like, if you have a heavy board, you pack the inside with blankets and stuff so nothing moves around. But like those boards, yeah, they're heavy, they're beautiful, but that's one of those boards. Like my boss has it, and he has a PVC 6, and underneath he only has a timeline, and he's like, why is it tight? I'm like, well, when you did your mock-up, did you factor in cabling? No, I didn't think about that. Well, yeah, like there's those things you have to think about, because like pancake plugs will work, but like these are all straight plugs. Like we're gonna have to, and sometimes they're long straights or they're the shorties. So yeah, that's a big factor, is like looking at the specs. People will get bored by the specs, but that's a huge part of it, is looking at the specs, looking at the sizing of it, the depth of it, because it makes a difference. Like people are like, oh, it's only an inch wider. An inch wider makes a massive difference when it comes to like your setup, and the board might just be too short, and you might have to lose your 8th overdrive, to accommodate stuff.
Don't tell me this, man.
I have people, and I'm not knocking them. I have 2 overdrives. I have the KTR and the Mulholland drive, and then I have the Vertex Boost. First time in my life I've ever had 2 overdrives on my board. I usually only run 1. I had one guy, he goes, man, I'm getting a lot of noise from my board. And I'm like, really? I just did the play test and everything was fine. And he goes, yeah, when I stack my Brothers, my Golden Boy, my Kelly 76, my Boost, and my Fuzz, and another Boost, it gets really noisy. I'm like, well, it's going to get, that's typical. That's going to be noisy. So
I wonder what his reference was, though, for noise, like before, like I remember I built a rig for a guy that had only used like an Axe Effects before, and he had like a gate on perpetually. And then when he went to like pedals, he's like, man, these pedals are so noisy, like compared to my Axe Effects. And I was like, well, send me like a snapshot of the, the Axe Effects on, in the software. And he had like a noise gate around, everything except just time-based stuff. And I was like, yeah, like, of course, you have a noise gate going on everything. So I think the reference point for people needs to be, clarified, like what noise comparatively to what, like you gotta have a reference point for what 60 cycle hum sounds like, what a tube amplifier noise floor sounds like, what an overdrive standard noise floor. One pedal though I do want to talk, or one switcher I want to talk about on here that we haven't really touched on too much before we get to, because I think you had another one of the bigger guys, right? These are all sort of like smaller switchers. For those that can't see, these are kind of like 3 to 7 loop version switchers. Yep. The Boss ES5, I think for the money, unquestionably is one of the best ones out there, because it's got the reorderable loops. The buffers are not that good, but you can bypass those and use your own external buffers. And some people gave it some crap for saying it wasn't that clean, it affected the tone. I haven't found that to be true on these. I found it to be pretty good, especially if you're using external buffers, or at the very least turning off the output buffer. The input buffer is 1 meg. It doesn't have particularly great output impedance, but presumably you're going to be running into a pedal right away, so it's probably not going to be that critical. But I think that those are really good switchers for the money. I think that they're easy to it's as easy to program to me as the G2 was, maybe slightly more complicated, but still in that realm of like really easy. Everything can be done from the face of it if you needed to. It's reorderable loops. You got 5 loops. I really think that the Boss ones, if somebody is going to try a MIDI programmable switcher for the first time and they don't have a big budget, I would say from like the low budget ones like the Boss, the Electro Harmonics, I would say that this one is probably the best one to start with if you're a rookie and you want to kind of get into it. You want to have the features of some of the bigger, more expensive, complicated ones, but want something that's really simple to program without having to dive into software. This is a pretty good one, I think, for that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have a lot of experience. Like when I first started building, I did a lot of these, but the more and more people have been like upgrading their units. But like I will say, when I first had to work with it, like scrolling through all the sub menus on the unit was like kind of frustrating in the beginning, because I was like, this is taking so long just to do MIDI, MIDI CCs and values and everything, and then realizing that there's an editor. And we were talking about it. It's the USB to MIDI like interface thing. It's like a lot of people had to use when you had to update your Strymon timelines with like their old Strymon stuff. Roland, I think that's what the MIDI hub or whatever that's called. But after getting the mess with one of those, and actually that same hookup to get into the editor was the way that Musicom did theirs for a while. But now we stocked all the Musicom stuff, but now they've moved over to the USB. I think it's it's the cameras. I don't remember what it's the same one the RJM has. I can't remember which one it is.
It's like what your printer would use.
Printer, the printer cable. Yeah, I always say USB, the printer cables. But I like for 454, getting those presets and it's sending all those same. Granted, you don't get the customization of the different pages, which is fine. But some people don't want that. They want just preset mode, manual mode. I think it's a great switcher. You don't get too complicated.
Yeah. You want to move to the big boys?
Let's go. Yeah. Obviously, looking at this, we all know about the PVC6 because we all rant and rave about it.
Yeah. It's
let
great.
me try to. Let me.
And Musicom also has I think a 6 or EFX LE something. They have one that's in that realm too, which is also a good one.
Yeah. They have some other one. Oh, I think I clicked the wrong one. Let me find it. No, I thought I clicked it. Is there a way? The one I'm clicking on, it keeps going to the wrong one.
Let's see. I might be able to. If you, why don't you send it to me, Brian, and I can see if I can bring it up. Just if you have the ability to just text it to me, I'll throw it up on the screen. I have like your computer screenshots, but it's not quite as cool as the real. Yeah,
I don't know why it's, like I said, this whole screen sharing thing is so new for me.
It's all good.
Okay, I'm going to go to our little text group. And, all right, here it is. All right, let's see if you can share it. Let me know.
All right, I'm going to pull it up. I see it. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Let me go to screen share. And, all right.
Maybe I should have tested this one earlier.
Here we go. Can you see it?
There we go.
Yeah.
I see it. There we go.
So we got the ES8. Got the Musicom Lab.
Mm-hmm. Then we got the G3 and the PVC
and the PVC10.
And I will say, these are not the only switchers. A big part is I could go pages and pages and pages of this stuff.
Right.
But I needed to go to sleep.
You left off the crocodile tail loop from One Control.
From one loop? From One Control, yes. Okay, so that was one of the ones I actually have it on a build over here that I did it for. And the cool thing about their stuff is they have little 1 series boxes. It's tiny, and I'll run over there and grab it in a second. But it's a single box. Screw it. I'm gonna grab it. I'm gonna talk and walk.
Do it.
It's a It's a single box, and it's made by One Control, and it's actually really, really handy because it's designed by One Control with Josh Smith. Actually, I'm back, and it's tiny, so it's just a little box that they did where it can be mono input, mono output. Sorry, I found the camera. Or you can actually do stereo input, stereo output. It's a single loop. So Josh had this designed, and it's a single MIDI in, and you can change the MIDI channel with the dip switches on the back, but he has 2 of these under his board to do his stereo stuff. So they started coming with all these little utility boxes and all these small little 1 switch loops, which are really cool. But then
just real quick, Brian, so it's clear to somebody who's listening. So it's basically like it's like the loop. If you were to disaggregate a loop out of one of the switchers and make it just a send and return, and it has a MIDI input, so you can basically add a loop to your switcher. Let's say you had a 10 loop switcher and you needed 11. You could make this the 11th.
Yes, correct. Sorry, I apologize. I realize that I'm not only talking to YouTube. Um, I do it all the time. I'll just start talking. Yeah. So if you think about it, say it's the same, just like that. I have a PVC 10, but I have 11 pedals, and I have 5 stereo pedals. You could essentially go out if you envision it going out of the PVC 10. It'd be 2 TS cables into a TRS cable into this, and then you would run to that other stereo pedal, and then you'd go TRS out. Depending on if you're going into an interfacer box or whatever you're going into, it'd be another TRS back to 2 TS cables. He did this as a hideaway kind of thing to where he could fit it under his Schmidt array boards, and it's really handy. It's really small. It's tiny. It's basic, but it allows you to add an extra loop or another, and it can be stereo or mono. So that's the cool thing about One Control is they started coming out with that kind of stuff. With I think it's the Crocodile. They have like a presetted version or just a normal loop switch version. They got great stuff. They really. I did leave it off. I will say that. I just forgot.
No, I was just teasing you. Because they're sort of they're a little more primitive than any of the things that are listed here, but they do have some good ideas. I'll certainly say that. But yeah, so many good things on this list. We got the ES8, the bigger brother of the ES5 boss, the Musicom Lab EFX MK5, which is the newest, latest, and greatest Musicom Lab switcher. G3, of course, bigger brother of the Atom, and then the big brother of the PBC 6X, the PBC 10.
Yeah, and the cool thing is they're all really great and very competitive. Not competitive. They all kind of have some of the same features. Obviously, some have some more features, but yeah.
So why do we all sort of unanimously, even in spite of it not having the reorderable loops, which all the other switchers have, do we still choose? I'm sort of inferring this a little bit, although there was some context to support this. Why do we still like the RJM?
I personally, I'm a huge fan. The editor is a big thing. I also think if you were, I think in my mind, the decision between the PBC 10 and the 6X is less about loops. So the 10 has a few more loops. It's less about loops and more about feature set in my mind. Obviously, that depends on the pedal board. But at the end of the day, the highlights for the 6X in my mind are its size. It's unbelievably small, and it has reorderable loops. The highlight for me for the PBC 10 is it has a couple more loops. 7 to 10 are stereo, and the big highlight is you can run them in parallel or series. You can do that per preset. That's less of a functional thing because you normally set and forget that, which is another podcast. But parallel loops is a huge thing, which we've talked about previously about wet, dry, wet, which I guess was episode 1. We talked about wet, dry, wet and the separation you can get when running parallel effects. And the PBC 10 is perfectly designed for that.
Yeah. It basically has their mini line mixer inside of it.
Yeah, it's actually physically a line mixer. They just popped inside. Done.
You just see it when you open up. There's this module that's bolted in. Yeah.
It's connected by some George Out cables inside or something.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I'm in the same boat. It's all there's 2 things. It's the editor, because the biggest selling point for me is I have as we all do, we have clients just all over the place, and I have one guy which I currently have his board down here, 38 by 19. Oh, that's how big the board is.
It's a house.
It's the case is over here, and it's like, you can see my hand. It's like up here. It's massive. But
that's like the trap door to my basement.
It's like the pull down the we don't have basements in Texas. We only have attics, which sucks. But for him, it was like, oh well, what if I have a question with programming? Okay, well then just send me your file. Oh, we can do that? Oh yeah. I can open it up here. I can build you a whole new set, or I can not the whole set. I don't do that, but like I can build you some pages. But like I've done it for people like before. Like one guy's like, I can't afford to pay you to do the whole board, but I really want you to program my RJM. I'll send you a blanket file, or I'll send you a file with exactly what you're wanting, with a breakout diagram of the MIDI channels, the loop board, all that kind of stuff. And it's so easy to do because it's on your computer, and you can edit it if you're on a plane or in a bus if you're touring. And when you get to your gig, you know, plug it in, or you pop that USB in, and like that's. I don't do that obviously because I don't tour, but like. I tell people, like, if you're touring, this is a really good option because you don't have to pull your whole board out. You don't have to set it up. You don't have to, like, if you're going to be turning overdrive knobs, but if it's just like, oh, I'm stacking these, I'm building a new song, it's simple, and it's really cool. So it's that, and the no limits, I call it, for the editor platform of pages, because you have 16 pages of basically whatever you want to do. That's the big part of it. Is like you'll get some of these switchers, and I'm not knocking them, I promise. Is like the boss in the Musicom, and my boss is always trying to sell me on the Musicom. He's like, you got to look at them. Like, they're amazing. I understand that, but if I can't customize each of the pages, so page 1 is presets, but presets page might also have some MIDI scrolling buttons on top, or it might, when you hold down on the button, it might go to page 10 to access your Golden Boy gain stages, all your MIDI controls. Like, that's the kind of stuff where you start to really get to customize and dive into that. You just realize, like, oh, this is really fun. That's what I would say. It's all around the customization for me.
I will say as well, the thing that goes hand in hand, just to play the other side, because my pick is RJM out of the list, but there is a learning curve to everything you just said. You're not going to be able to do that on day 2 of having your RJM. You're going to have to do a lot of trial and error. Getting the basics, like turning loops on, creating a preset, that is pretty straightforward, and you can get that pretty quick. But doing some more deep editing, which the RJM excels at, better than anyone else on the market. The deep editing, when I'm trying to learn a new thing, like I have this idea, I usually have to sit there and be like, all right, I'll try this. And then I hit the button. Nope, try it again, upload the file, hit the button. And I'm doing a lot of trial and error back and forth. But the thing I do tell customers as well with the RJM stuff, if you think it's possible, it probably is. Like, I learned stuff about the RJM all the time, and I've been using them for 10 years. Like, they're just so deep. And Ron is always making them better. So it's a very capable switcher. But you have to understand there is a learning curve to it. So don't go in thinking you're going to master it like your 2-knob overdrive and you can figure it out in 30 seconds. It's just not going to happen. Yeah. You're going to have to spend some time on it.
I will say I do like the videos you guys put out, the ABCs of the PVC, I think it was called. I think you did that.
That was a while ago. Yeah.
I liked that. I started doing some of these, like, oh wow, my PVC can like I did some videos and they were fun, but then like the requests of can do a video on this, do a video on that.
It just gets
so much. It's just never ending. It's like, can you do a video on this? And I'm like, I can. That's a lot of work to show how to do one thing.
Yeah.
But I like it how you guys like did snapshots of how to do things, and it was like critical things. I agree. You're not going to be able to know how tapping the switch will do a preset, but then holding it can do a hold feature, but that hold feature might turn a bunch of stuff on and do all these and send MIDI clock and stuff, and without reading the manual or watching the videos. So I would say, like, any of these switchers, and these are goes against what I've said in a previous chairman meeting, is a lot of YouTube videos makes a big difference when it comes to these switchers, because there's enough of them out there that they show you a lot of the functions. So like, where I always suggest go and play on the unit and whatnot, or play on the pedal and make sure it's the tone you want. You can still do that with switching systems. It's a little bit more harder. Like, if a guy comes here and says, I want to play around with a PVC 10, I'm like, well, I can show it to you and you can press the switches and navigate. But like plugging in pedals, like that's a whole different game. Go on YouTube, search PPC 10 or ES8 or G3 or Mark 5 or whatever you want to, and watch. It may be a video from a couple years ago, but it shows that person utilizing it and how they utilized it. Even Jeffrey Cundy, when he used to have the disaster area stuff, you guys have did the boards for on the DPC8s and DMC8s and stuff, like those types of switches. Like you can go and see past people and how they used it and kind of go, oh yeah, I can do that, or that kind of thing. So I said, switchers, you can kind of go online and by watching videos get a gist. And that's typically how I started out. Like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I think I can figure it out, and then kind of go from there. But yeah.
I will just say one more quick thing. I don't want to spend a lot of time here because I know we're coming towards the end here, but one company that has not come up that has done an incredible job on UX, like the user interface and stuff, is Morningstar. And so they do kind of a combo. You can buy a MIDI controller and a separate switcher that the MIDI controller talks to. But as far as a first MIDI controller, if you're getting into MIDI and switchers and stuff, they have a great editor. They have a good app, and it's simple to use if it's your first time. Not nearly as deep as what some of the other, especially RJM, can do, but they've done a great job as well. So just worth mentioning, since we're on the topic, is Morningstar's. They also do some really interesting stuff.
I will say with the Morningstars, if you're listening or watching, a Morningstar, the MC3, 6, or 8, they're all MIDI controllers. So if you're planning on getting one of those, which I highly recommend, they're great units. I've done plenty of them on boards, is you have to have, if you're going to run it with a bunch of overdrives, you need to get like their ML5 or the RGM, the Effects Gizmo, or the Meg X, or you have to get like the Voodoo Lab Hex, something that can, or the Atom. I think the Gig Rig has like some kind of Atom extension or whatever.
Module or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, you have to get something, or like the rack gizmo. Like you could do a rack if you're going to do a rack, and you could get like the gizmo rack that they have from RJM. Like you have to get something to turn the loops on and off. If you have a board that's full of all MIDI pedals, plug it all in and then toggle messages on and off. But that's one thing to think about, is that on the back, it doesn't have physical loops. It's a MIDI controller with some output options. Like I think it's MIDI 5-pin. I think there's a 1/4 inch and an 1/8 inch.
Depends on the one you get. So the 6 has 2 quarters, and then I think the 8 has even more than that. It has more TRS outputs. Yep.
And then the 3, the newest mini one, which is like the size of an iPhone, is like 1/8 inch. I think there's like 4 1/8 inch. I actually haven't had a 3 through, so I haven't seen it. But yeah, lots of options. I mean, there's so many different ways you can kind of go about these kind of switchers. But I would say, as we're wrapping up, do your research on the switchers. We say it every single time. It's the most important thing about like gear and your purchases and your money is doing the research, finding what you like. Sometimes what you like might not be the same thing your friend likes, but if it works for you and your rig, I would say get it. Do you guys have anything you would like to add before we end?
Well, one just clarification on the Morningstar, if people are not watching this, is imagine that you were to take let's say the Boss or the Musicom Lab or any of these, you were to take the foot switches out separately from all the inputs and outputs, all the sends and returns. It's kind of what Morningstar is where all the sends and returns are one unit, so all of the jacks or the inputs and outputs, sends and returns, all the loops, and then their controller, the MIDI controller, is its own thing. So they basically disaggregated the two parts of the switcher and just made them into their own units. So if you have a hard time visualizing what that might look like, that's kind of what they're doing. The other thing that I wanted to just touch on really quickly before we complete is, the one difference between all of the larger switchers we have up on the screen here, between the PBC, which we all prefer, versus all the other ones, one of the biggest differences is that it doesn't have the reorderable loops. And I wanted to just talk about that quickly, in that there still is, in spite of what may seem like a great idea, there still is a pretty standardized way to order your pedals. And when it comes to actually doing a gig and performing with your pedal board, there's really not a whole lot of elasticity in terms of where things might end up going. So the flexibility of having reorderable loops, even though it's a great idea, I would say in most rigs it is never realized. The only time I've really ever used that function is if I'm trying to just figure out in context where something might go best in terms of its order. So like when you watch that pedal show and they're doing demonstrations of multiple pedals and they're moving them in different orders, great for that. That's almost never going to be a context you would ever use on a gig or on most professional applications of a pedal board. So I think that in practice, you probably have already vetted this position, I would hope, before this pedal goes on your pedal board that you think might be a variable placement. So, again, great idea to have the reorderable loops. This is not just restricted to Gig Rig. It's also on the Musicom Lab. It's also on the Boss and even on the PBC6X. I think it's one of those things that a name sounds really cool, but in practicality, once you've established the best position for a certain effect, it's pretty much going to be that position for that effect. Rarely have I seen people actually utilizing the switching of order on things.
Yeah, I only ever notice anyone utilizing switching is like if they have an extra loop and they're like, oh, I want to plug it into a patch bay and do like a demo loop. I'm like, okay, what do you want in the demo loop? Well, I don't know. So like they'll maybe have like a Y split cable or something, and they can designate where that is going. If it's in that, if they're doing 4-cable method and they're doing a demo pedal, they could put it in the effects loop of the amp easily, or they could put it before, like those kind of things. So I also agree in the same sense. I never used it when I had the PBC6. That's why I have a 10 again. But for the times that you need it, for those kind of things. And like you just said, you're kind of going to figure out where it goes
just to
beforehand.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, just to keep things a little spicy. I'm going to disagree.
Okay.
And I agree for the majority of the pedal board. Absolutely agree. Once you're there, it's going to stay there. But what if you want to change up your sound? And a prime example of this is tremolo. Tremolo before delay and reverb versus after delay and reverb, both are awesome sounds, but drastically different. And so I think that's one example. I gave you the example before, but the problem
the problem there is that most tremolos, I guess it depends if it's a standalone tremolo or if it's in a multi-effects. A lot of them are mono.
Yep.
And not all the loops are stereo, so you can't reorder a mono and a stereo loop without summing back to mono.
Yeah, which the 6X will do automatically, and other ones will do. But all I'm saying is that I do agree for 90% of the time, and I would never sell someone on reorderable loops if they didn't have the knowledge or practice to back that use up. But there are exceptions to the rule. I'm on the side where I don't change my loop order. All I'm saying is that there have been times in setups where it has been a critical part of the planning process to allow it, and we build it into the presets. But that is less than 10% of the builds would actually make good use of that. So I agree, except for that last 10% of people that it might really apply to. But for the vast majority, I think that people are in the camp of, that sounds awesome, like what Mason said, and then you get to the practicality of using the board and it never gets touched. So it's just one of those things, like think through it practically. If you have never so far wanted to reorder your pedals while playing live, it's not going to change when you get a looper. Yeah. So just practically think through that. I just don't want to always agree on all of this stuff when there are people out there that will make use of it, but the majority, I agree, the majority will not.
I agree. I have plenty of people. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mason. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say Grant's being so disruptive today.
I'm sorry, guys. It's the rebellious Canadian me. I just don't want to apologize again. I'm sick of it.
But that's not the prototypical Canadian.
I know. I'm sorry, man.
They're
I'm
agreeable.
Just so sorry, eh?
He didn't get his maple syrup this morning.
Oh, it kills me.
Back off.
We'll send you a care package. No, I mean, I will say, again, with the loop reordering, as live practical, it's not like I have some guys that are at-home players. Like I have one guy, he owns a business, and he just loves to play. He loves gear. So he's always you see that the video of John Mayer where he pulls out that big drawer, and it's just like pedals. It's just like he's all these pedals. That's like he has something like that. All these pedals, and he's constantly switching out stuff, and he has a PBC 10. So what he runs into is he has to drive an hour here. So he wants me to make all these changes, and I don't mind doing it. I like doing changes and stuff, but I'm like, it might be easier if we get a PBC 6, maybe get that one and a gizmo and pair them together, and we're actually talking about adding a gizmo to his thing because he likes the size of the 10, but he wants to be able to reorder some of the loops and stuff. And he's like, yeah, that would make it easier because sometimes I don't want this to be fuzz and I want it to be boost, so I can swap it out and then I can move it in my chain. And he goes, I'm not playing anywhere, so it's not like that. It's just for me. Right. So there may be some of those people that just like that stuff. So anyway, that's what I would say. So all right.
So to summarize, to wrap up, our top two choices or top three choices, the Mountain Rushmore of switchers are what?
Grant, what do you think?
Well, I think we can all agree on the, if I had to pick a specific switcher, even within a company, I would personally pick the feature set of the 10 as my number one. And then I would probably go over to something like maybe an ES5 for number two, and I would still have something practical and simple. I'll change my other choice actually from Loopmaster to, you brought up the QSAC, the PBT series. They are unbelievable, and I totally forgot about them. So they would also be on the list as well. The PBT for a basic, I want to turn pedals on and off and maybe do basic one touch turns on multiple loops. They're awesome. So those would be my three.
What do you say, Mason?
I'm in agreement with the PVC 10. Again, I think that the one thing that it doesn't have with the reorderable loops to me is not a deficit. I think that there really is a standardized loop order, and they're great for that. I love the PVC 10. I love the PVC 6, and I think the Musicom Lab stuff is also really great in terms of its reliability, its function, its sound. If you want kind of more of a mid-priced but a lot of options. And then I think the Boss, if you're on a budget, is really good for what it is. The buffers I think are the biggest deficit, and that's easy to bypass in the globals, and you can use your own buffers to supplement. And you can get those anywhere, which is nice if you ever have one go down. But again, the customer service element with RJM is superior. I mean, you hear back same day. And to get somebody that really knows the ins and outs of the product, you're talking to the guy that engineered it, that wrote the programming, that wrote all of the back end software. So it's a pretty incredible user experience, and it's a pretty incredible unit.
Yeah, I agree. I'm full blown RJM. I love their stuff. So I would say the
Did you get an
PVC
RJM
6 and 10. Honestly, wouldn't be surprised. No, I love the I've had the 10 and 6. I've had all their stuff. I would say the PVC 10. I love everything about the PVC 10. The size of it. I love I'm diving more into parallel and series for myself. So I would say that and the 6. They're both still at the top for me. But if I had to pick up a backup switcher for the price point and everything, I would pick the Musicom only because it's one of our other mostly top sold units we have, and because their editor is much newer now, that there's more options and stuff. Other than that, the third coming in very nice and close is the Disaster Area stuff. Like, he makes really good stuff, and it's simple, and they're compact, and they do time clocks and MIDI controllers and MIDI loop control. Like, they do a ton of stuff. So now
we need to get a PBC hater on this podcast and just have a discussion.
Let me just grab my boss. He loves the Musicom stuff.
We need to get a gig rig enthusiast. That's what we need. We need a gig rig enthusiast, and we need to do some pros and cons, because people are going to get sick of us fanboying over RJM, even though it's for good reason, all the time, because it'd be interesting to see someone from the other side.
Well, it would be. I think that the challenge would be is that there's not a lot of guys that are using them. So I think in a professional context, outside of going to the source, right, having Dan,
we just get Dan.
But I don't think Dan's using the RJM, so he's not, he doesn't have the experience of the alternative, so it's we're all in our own vacuums.
I will say another big part about it is the RJM over the G2, and they're both great. I'm going to say it still, because they're great units. I have a G2 sitting down here on a shelf for a build, and they're great units. It's all about accessibility too, because I can get a PVC 10 in 2 days, but getting a gig rig, if they're not in the US, takes just much longer to get. So that's a big part of it too.
How about this? If you're watching on YouTube and you think we are wrong, which is very possible, put the comments in the YouTube channel, and maybe we can open up a bit of a polite discourse of pros and cons. And I would actually love to hear someone fight for the gig rig, because it's not going to happen between the three of us. And so it would be interesting to see someone kind of give the other perspective. I would personally enjoy that.
Talk us off the ledge on the software. Talk us off the ledge on the buffers. Talk us off the ledge on the...
there's a lot of ledges.
There's a lot of ledges to talk people off of.
Yep. I got Omilion ledges, so I'm just...
Well, gentlemen, chairman,
all right.
I think we got a lot done today. I hope that the discourse is valuable to those listening. Of course, you can watch us on YouTube if you want to see the conversation between the three of us, and if you want to just listen to it on your favorite podcatcher, whether that's Apple iTunes or Spotify or whatever it may be, you can always rate and review us, and tell us what you think about the podcast, if it's good or bad. Of course, we would love a 5-star rating if you feel like we've earned it, and if not, give Grant and Brian a 5-star rating, because they're good guys and they know what they're talking about, and they make good products. And if you're listening to all this and you're like, man, I really want somebody to build my pedal board, you should definitely reach out to them to get a quote. And because I don't really build pedal boards, but they do. And any last words before we sign off today, gents?
No, I think this was a ton of fun. I really enjoyed it, and it's cool hearing you guys' perspectives. And I always... and I'm not saying this lightly, I always learn a lot when I chat with you guys, and I know that the people listening they'll at least have something to take away. So I appreciate you guys sharing your wisdom, and I'm having a ton of fun. So thanks for talking switchers with me today.
Yeah, me too. I agree. I will say episode 1 about wet, dry, wet, I learned so much, and I was so I carpool with my boss on the way here, and we were talking about wet, dry, wet. He goes, I didn't know you knew about that stuff. I honestly didn't know as much as I thought I knew until I started getting into the video. So it's been cool to go back and listen and see the people asking questions. And when this is live, feel free to ask questions, and we'll jump on and we'll respond, and or direct message us on Instagram or anything. But yeah, no, this has been great, and I want someone to challenge us though on that G2.
Yeah.
I would love to see that. So yeah, that's it for me.
All right, guys.
See ya.
Bye.
See ya.